Proportional Response, Book 1, Chapter 14, Part 11, An Offer for a Cat. Anibal sat and stared at his girlfriend, whose under-the-breath comment had just turned every eye to look at her. He'd have been embarrassed, or cringed. Vashna just sat a little straighter, looked blandly across the room, and spoke casually. The Baitha are the only other council species without a unified government. Everyone knows that. She turned to Henry. I am sure you know why. Henry nodded, still looking at her somewhat puzzled. Anibal could tell that his brother had no idea where Vashna was going, but didn't want to stop her because she had come up with good ideas in the past. After a moment's pause, he spoke. They are not unified because they are an incredibly individualistic species. They are highly unusual in the council, even for an insectoid race, in that they are egg layers, seem to have a limited level of ancestral memory, and come out of the egg with full mental and physical capabilities, or so they claim. They don't even have the concept of caring for their young. Hatchlings are expected to know what they need to know from the start. Vashna nodded. That is the highlights. Of course, that ancestral memory is also strange. It is more a matter of various skills being passed down than memory. They get language, an understanding of what is and isn't safe to eat, and, somehow, a lot in the way of motor skills, but not the actual memories. Vashna shook her head and smiled apologetically. I am straying off the point. Suffice it to say that there is a lot of fascinating detail, but the most important thing is that they are supremely individualistic, to the point that the very concept of government, as we think of it, is anathema to them. This works for them for a lot of reasons, mostly because they are from such a low-index world that they have little to fight over in the way of resources. Between that and some other quirks of their physiology, war, or for that matter violence, for the most part, was not something they had encountered before they met other species. She sighed deeply, and pinched the bridge of her nose as she noticed both Yoro and Galen, the Thamiric, getting impatient. They are, however, a heavily contentious lot, constantly wrestling with each other for dominance is not the right word. Her Grace Yoro interjected. Prestige is closer, but even that is not right. I have made a small study of the Baitha, and they are truly fascinating, but I am not sure what you are getting at. Vashna smiled gratefully at her Grace for the explanation before she continued. The Baitha computer network is highly secure, and they are probably the council race who come closest parity with the humans in terms of computer security, yet even they are far behind. The constant infighting with them has rules, but it mostly centers around. Yoro suddenly sat bolt upright in her chair, and her eyes went wide. Information. Of course, if one of them could hire a human hacker, it would give him a huge advantage in their internal politics, and would gain him. Yoro shook her head. Okay, I can see how a Baitha would be interested in hiring the man, and would even be willing to pay exorbitant amounts of money to do so. We still have to get the message to him, and there is the problem of his hatred for the Confederation. Henry smiled, and Anibal could feel the plan coming together in his brother's mind. He decided to let Henry think while asking the obvious question. This Abisikat is more mercenary than he is vengeful, at least as far as we can tell, particularly if the money is sufficient. Still, who should contact the Baitha? Their ambassador here refuses to see me, or anyone that I know of, most of the time, unless you have something to offer him first, and this is certainly not nothing, but not something we could tell them we have. Vashna waved her hand at Henry. Maybe we don't need to go through their ambassador. In fact, that might not be the best idea anyway. Wouldn't it be better to get Fat Cat off this planet entirely? She turned a laser-focused gaze on Yoro. That conversation we had the other day, where we were discussing the Baitha, and you said that the Diadem had dealings with a few of their wealthier individuals. Yoro looked at Vashna and did a slow blink, her brow furrowed again. Then her eyes widened slightly and she smiled. Yes, of course, though I don't remember the details. Still, that part you and I can discuss later. Henry's tight lips split into a wan smile. So, you are saying that your empire has a contact among the Baitha who would pay any price to hire this guy away. I suppose you plan to use the Findle to get the message to Fat Cat. Yoro nodded. Then Henry turned to stare pointedly at Galen, whose eyebrow feathers rose in response. And I suppose I am the one who is to relay this message to the few contacts we have in the Feindel government, so that they can order a message delivered to your indulgent predator human. Hannibal furrowed his eyebrows for a moment and started to correct the Themirkan's translator error, then caught the glint of amusement in the man's eye and shook his own head instead as the ambassador continued. You do know that we Thimir can find the Finidal somewhat distasteful, do you not? We may both be of avian-like species, but they are fearful, fragile, bootlicking Zoltan lovers, where we consider the Elton as much of an enemy as you do. Henry nodded and held up a placating hand. We know, and please do not think for a moment that I don't appreciate what we asked for when we asked you to play go-between for us. The thing is, they seem to think that you have some sort of kinship with them, probably because you have feathers in common, and seemed like they would cooperate better with you than with the Arab, sir. Galen frowned, but he nodded. I can make the arrangements, or at least see to it that the arrangements are made. I need to know what the Bither will offer, however. Hannibal felt another moment of puzzlement as Euro glanced, in passing, at his girlfriend before she spoke. You all know the unofficial standard rates for this sort of employment, yes? The Faltherin Crown will guarantee a rate of 100 times that amount, paid monthly, good for a 1-year contract at a minimum. Hannibal heard himself gasp, along with everyone in the room except for Yoro and Vashna. His girlfriend squeezed his hand a moment, and a glance showed a face of disappointment, annoyance. Something is going on here. I think Yoro knows what noble family my little lady belongs to. He shrugged inwardly and told himself for the 1000th time that it didn't matter, and what he cared about sat right beside him. Galen recovered himself quickly and looked askance at Yoro. You... Okay, you don't need to look at me like that. Of course you are sure. Yoro gave him a curt nod, then gestured vaguely towards the courtyard and fighter practice. Luckily, I am not expected as much outside, so if Henry will allow me the use of one of his quantum communicators, I can be relayed to the Crown as soon as we adjourn, and should be able to have a contract by the time fighter practice is ended. Galen nodded. Very well. Imprint the contract to a read-only crystal, keyed to human DNA, and I will use my own relay to arrange for a Feindel agent to pick the crystal up from a dead drop. The crystal should be in this damnable human's hands by morning, if we play it right. NBL shifted in his seat. He didn't like things moving this fast. Politics was a game of patience and slow moves, not high-speed negotiations done across light years. Still, time was of the essence, and that global network wouldn't stay down forever. Wait, the global network? Henry spoke into the void. Thank you all. I was hoping we could find a way to keep from starting a war tomorrow. Let us all hope and pray to whatever we hold holy that this works. I think we all know how many lives are riding on this. So, if there is nothing else... Words tumbled out of Hannibal's mouth so fast he surprised himself. There needs to be a rider on that contract, a bonus, or a condition of employment, or a proof of abilities. Tell this human that he must put something out that will crash the global network again when it comes back online. He paused and turned to Jake, who seemed absorbed in his screen. That is, if you and yours can take whatever he does and make it look like both crashes were his fault. Jake's brow furrowed, and he gave Hannibal a sharp look that made him want to recoil. Vashna was sitting there beaming at him, however, and that seemed to bolster him somehow. I wish she wouldn't do that. No, that isn't true. Not the time, Hannibal. Jake saved him by speaking. Of course we could, but neither should be necessary. We exploited a bunch of weaknesses in the Zoltan hardware, which caused a cascading failure across their networks. You see? Henry cleared his throat loudly, and Jake rolled his eyes before he continued. Okay, fine. Suffice it to say that there is no way the current problem could be linked to us. Hannibal held up a placating hand. I don't mean to disparage your expertise, or imply that it could be. He stopped himself and shook his head, then took a different track. I was thinking about the political implications here. The Exaltans losing their hacker during the chaos of the internet's being down will be very suspicious, and will have them eyeing this embassy as a cause. If, however, their man disappears and crashes the network behind him, and there is evidence he did it himself the first time... Jake raised a single eyebrow at him and shook his head. but Henry nodded, as did Euro and the Arab so. It was Galen, however, who spoke.
You speak a great deal of sense, my tall blue friend, as you so often do. I think our friend's addition to the scheme is one of wisdom. Do we all concur?
Henry swept the room with his eyes, and then spoke.
I agree with all of you. It is an excellent idea. Jake, please make it happen on your end. Expect showtime to be tomorrow evening. Can you and your people get things in order by then?
Jake's face paled slightly, and Anibel's hand reached for a comms unit to call for a medic before he remembered this was somewhat normal for humans. The human nodded, his eyes slightly wide, and stood.
It is not going to be easy, boss, but we will get it done. One impossible miracle coming up. Please make sure.
Henry waved a hand at the man.
I will see to it that your team has sufficient food, water, coffee, and other stimulants needed to make it happen. Go ahead and get your team going.
Jake gave a strange half grin and left.